Welcome back to another episode of AP Taylor Swift. Today we have a very special episode. We have our very first guest. Show and Tell today is on Surrealism. And since that's art history, and I took a couple art history classes in college, but it's been a while, certainly not an expert, brought in a special guest, Abby Aleksinas. Abby may better be known to Swift Talk as Art History Swift Talk. That's at Art History Swift Talk. We'll put it in our show notes so you can follow her, where she makes creative connections between art history and Taylor Swift. She received her master's in American Fine and Decorative Art and went on to work for Lark Mason of the Antiques Roadshow, as well as Sotheby's Auction House. And she's since moved to the Southeast, where she currently resides with her husband and 3 children and works for an e-commerce marketplace. Thanks for joining us, Abby.
Thank you for having me. This is so fun.
We're excited to have you.
Yes, so excited.
It is more about your TikTok and how you're bringing the worlds of art history and Taylor Swift together. How did that even start?
So really, around the time that the Eras tour had started, all of the really great grassroots Eras tour footage that I enjoyed watching, I realized it was all coming from TikTok. So I just thought, why don't I just join TikTok? And so I did, and then I kind of realized just being on Swift Talk and interacting with other fans, that there really was an opportunity to kind of talk about art history. And I was kind of surprised, just because this is completely biased, but I do find the fandom to be collectively very smart and very well read. So I was kind of surprised that there were a few videos here and there, but there wasn't anyone consistently posting that sort of content. So I just thought, if not me, yeah, exactly.
What are some of your favorite connections between art history and Taylor Swift that you've made that you saw were missing?
Really just a lot of the videos. I think that a lot of what's discussed deals with her personal life. And so I don't think that her lyrics are obviously monolithic either. So especially with the music videos, the imagery, how the fandom has kind of made these connections with colors and symbols, and the fact that, especially in terms of my favorite artist is Magritte, I always say he would love the uproar that's caused when she's wearing the color green 3 times in 1 week, because to someone who's not familiar with her work, they're like, oh, she's just wearing green. To a Swiftie, it's completely different. And Rep TV's coming, it's so funny, just the fodder that it creates.
I think stumbling on your account was so fun because the way that we come up with these themes, it's very much these are things we're interested in talking about. Let's see if we can find connections to Taylor Swift in her music or look at it from that lens. And the fact that you also are dedicated this entire account to that perspective is really cool and really validating, because it's oh, it's not actually a stretch
No, exactly.
to connect surrealism to her music. There's so much that you can draw in parallel, or so many connections you can draw.
Great. Yeah, exactly. And I think that there are seeds of it in her earlier albums, especially with Midnights. I just completely was blown away by the imagery, as we had discussed earlier, Lavender Haze, which discuss, I guess, later. It's just the best example of this. Surrealism is my favorite movement. So
tell us more about what is Surrealism, and then I'd love to also learn why it's your favorite.
All right. So Surrealism is the term Surrealisme first appeared in 1917 thanks to French poet Guillaume Apollinaire. So Surrealism really started after World War I, and it greatly influenced culture very, very quickly. So literature, film, visual arts, but also fashion, politics, and advertising. And you had these 2 branches that there's the absolute surrealism, which is the more abstract art and style. Juan Miro is a great example of that. And then there are the veristic surrealists. And that's really what people associate surrealism with now. And so the movement is considered to have officially started in 1924 with the publication of the Surrealist Manifesto by André Breton. And so veristic surrealism, it uses, in its execution, it's very realist in style. And so you had, a lot of unconventional pairings or recognizable objects in different environments. And so it really kind of challenges convention, it challenges conditioning, and challenging our own association with like objects and words and images.
Moreau was considered as an early surrealist. He's actually my favorite artist. I've got a piece here, but I had no idea. And I probably didn't make that connection because of what you were just saying. Surrealism is known for like the objects in what is it? What did you just say? Random places or unexpected. The unexpectedness of everyday objects in
And so, and with Miro and the other like absolute surrealists, what they used was Freud's theory of free association. So they were just kind of creating without any like preconception. And automatism is what then inspired the abstract expressionists like Jackson Pollock in the US.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Really cool.
It's one invisible string, I like to say.
I definitely think that the unconventional pairings and the challenging our own understanding themes that you were mentioning comes up in maybe all the songs that we're discussing today, but I think it comes up a lot in Taylor's music when she plays with lyrics and tries to bring different kinds of objects together.
Yeah, absolutely. With Magritte especially, which I talk a lot about her work in connection to him. And surrealism at the heart of it is really about transformation and metamorphosis, which whenever someone asks me, oh, why do you like her music so much? I say, you have to think in a span of 6 years, the same person gave us 1989, Reputation, Lover, Folklore, and Evermore, and was successful at doing it. Like there are many artists that have tried to weave in and out of different musical genres, as she said last year, but many of them aren't successful at it. So the fact that she's been able to give this body of work that is so different, I think it speaks so much to just her and her artistry.
Why is surrealism your favorite?
I love the paradigms. I love the unexpected. I love kind of challenging convention and seeing things presented in a way that really like bucks what you would traditionally expect. And I love Magritte's really the reason why I love surrealism, because his work is rendered so beautifully, but it's just this presentation of the uncanny. And it's just so thought provoking. It's not just wondering, well, what's going on here? Because he said there is no meaning, which I kind of loved, but obviously there's some meaning.
There were no meaning. Wouldn't have a whole master's degree in it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But maybe he didn't intend it to have meaning. And I feel like it's similar to what we do with her music and looking at her lyrics. There might be a simple meaning, but there's also more meaning. You can look at it from different angles and different lenses and perspectives and get different meaning, which makes it really fun, even if it wasn't her initial intention. It's ours now.
Exactly.
You mentioned that you see elements of surrealism in some of her early works as well. Can you talk about any of those that stand out to you?
Yeah, so I had actually had a blog that I had planned on like starting years ago and just never got around to it. But one of my favorite uses of especially in her lyrics is the song Treacherous, which reminds me of the treachery of images.
I love that.
The hope is treacherous, the daydream is dangerous, forever going with the flow, but your friction. It's her use of the double that Magritte used commonly in his work that I love to see it, especially from an album like Red, which she was obviously like famous and like was writing her own songs, but seeing those like seeds of that realist nature in her work is what I really excited about.
Well, now I wish we had this conversation before we picked our songs for the day. It would have expanded the pool of what I thought we could do.
I'm still stoked about the songs we have picked.
No, we did pick
because
good ones.
just as you're talking, I'm like, ooh, nailed it. I think we're going to have a fun conversation.
Yeah.
You
Especially
mentioned
Lavender Haze. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, you're good. I have a question. So earlier you mentioned the uncanny, which I love the uncanny in surrealism. I think it's really interesting. Do you have any good examples of it for someone who maybe, like some of our listeners who maybe don't know exactly what that means? The only example that's coming to my mind is the Polar Express movie and how disconcerting that film can be. But I feel like that's maybe not the most educated example, but I think the uncanny is really interesting. So how would you explain it to someone who has no concept of what it is?
In Magritte's like The Son of Man, like having the placement of objects with the apple in front of the man's face, like just this kind of, I guess you could call it like this uncanny, sublime presentation that is in his work. Also in The Great War, there's a woman in Victorian dress and in front of her face is like a bouquet of, I believe it's violets.
I thought you meant the Taylor Swift song, but there was
Oh, no.
another good connection.
There is a connection there too. Yeah, I mean, it's just like this. It's this. How can I say this? Like, it's just the unexpected that I really love. That's rendered in a realist fashion. It's not like kind of like that abstract, free flowing like movement of paint on a canvas, but it's like this conscious decision to kind of put that imagery in an environment that's unexpected is that I love so much.
I mean,
If that
Dali's
makes sense.
melting clocks. Like Dali to me has that. Like
Yeah.
it has a realist technique, yet
Mhm.
with this uncanny, unexpected imagery.
Right.
Like, I really liked what she said earlier about unconventional pairing. So it's like the idea of like face, apple in front of face. Like you would not expect that. And I think, Jen, disconcerting is a good word too, to say that.
That'll
Not
come up
only-
in my song.
Not only
disconcerting.
also just a little out there enough to make you a little uncomfortable or like make you feel some sort of way.
It has great potential for horror, which I have a book recommendation for that. I read a Stephen King every year in October. It's just my little just creepy
Nice.
month
I love it.
tradition.
I love that.
And last year I read Duma Key, Uma Key. It's like a Florida key. And it's very Stephen King. It's probably for me one of the scarier ones, but the main protagonist is an artist who kind of essentially comes down with like The Shining, if you're familiar with Stephen King, but this almost like goes into like trances or has knowledge he shouldn't have, and the way he like processes it is he does surrealist paintings. And he becomes kind of a successful artist, but he's realizing that there's something more going on here, and then that's where you get into the world of Stephen King kind of stuff. So it was a fun use of the
Interesting.
uncanny and like the potential for horror and kind of leaning into it. So I do recommend that if you kind of like the
Yeah,
horror
sure.
aspect that is there.
Yeah.
You mentioned Lavender Haze. Can you give us a little preview of some things that stand out in Lavender Haze of surrealism? And spoiler alert, we'll be talking about Lavender Haze today as well, so we'll
Yes.
go into it some more. But would love to hear your thoughts.
So the video of Lavender Haze, the part where she separates the television screen, and then there's the koi fish in like the cosmos behind it, I completely freaked out because there's a female surrealist artist. Her name is Dorothea Tanning, and she had a painting called Endgame.
Stop it.
No, I know.
Stop it.
Pure
The joke-
coincidence.
The jokes write themselves. And I flipped out. I said to which I'll go into that later. But so I completely flipped out because I went and tried to look up this painting because I'd seen it before. And it's basically the image is set on a chessboard.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a slipper that is squashing the bishop. And at the time that she painted this, she was madly in love with Max Ernst, who is also another very well-known surrealist. And they were both still finalizing the divorces from their respective first marriages. And then in the lower left of the painting is part of the board is like torn away to reveal this landscape as if that's where she's escaping to. And so in that song where Taylor talks about that 1950s is that they're trying to push on her and like, is she a wife or just a one night? That the parallel with Dorothea's, work is that she was trying to finalize this divorce, be with the man she loved. But even at that time, despite them being a part of this like very progressive, like artistic movement, it was still very much frowned upon to live or to cohabitate, like, or live with someone when you weren't married. So it's kind of like both of these women who were such amazing artists that are still kind of just being confined to these, societies like judgment and like what's expected of women. So when I saw that, I just thought, oh my God.
So now I get it why you were like, how is nobody else talking about the connection between art history and Taylor Swift? Because there's just too many connections.
Yeah, too many.
Clearly, I mean, we always joke that there's no such thing as a coincidence in Taylor's world, which is so true.
I know.
There's no way you can have these three things together and her not know about it, right?
I know. And and I didn't even know at the time. I was like, I know that there's a painting called, because everyone was talking about the name Dorothea. Like, why not Dorothy? And I'm like, I've heard the name Dorothea before. Like, I was like,
I know this one.
like, no big deal. And then I saw the video and I was like, whoa. And then I saw that the title was Endgame because I wasn't able to you know,
And
like,
it's on a
didn't remember the time.
chessboard, and we have a lot of chess imagery in Master. There's like so
Forget
many
it.
things. Oh my
So much.
goodness.
I know. It's like, and Dorothea, actually, her life reminds me of the lyrics to the song Dorothea. She grew up in a very small town in Illinois. She then goes on, she moves to Chicago and then eventually New York. And she's at the center of this just edgy, like artistic, like circle. And it's who, if you ever are tired of being known for who you know, because even though she was a very, you know, wonderful artist in her own right, Max
husband
still
was-
kind of
yeah.
overshadowed. You know, I don't think he did that intentionally, but it just was it's just the nature of how that works out. So I just completely geeked out. And I was searching. I was like, you can't, because then I didn't want to create these videos and someone be like, you've stolen my content. But I really couldn't find anything. That was, I was so surprised when I was searching for that. 'Cause
Oh,
I
and
couldn't find it.
Max Ernst, I was watching Transatlantic and I read the story of Varian Fry, and he was one of the people who was rescued by Varian Fry out of Nazi Europe. Anyway, I'm like, why does
Yes.
I was like, I know I studied Max Ernst, but why does the name sound even more familiar? Because I literally just
he was jailed.
none
Because
of
they were like,
none of it was
they
accidental.
considered, the Nazis, they considered
Surrealism, degenerate art. That was the one. That was the class that made
Yes.
me no longer be an art history major. I took an interwar period art class and studying degenerate art, and I was like, this is fascinating, but like, wow, this is really hard. So maybe I'll just take the classes, but not be the art history major.
Yeah. Oh, and I forgot to mention too, the Surrealists were very inspired by Freud's work, but he was not a fan of the Surrealists. He was really
interesting.
Oh yeah, he was very skeptical. So Andre Breton actually appeared on his doorstep, unannounced, uninvited, and obviously I think anyone would kind of be like taken aback. And Breton was like so upset that Freud wasn't excited to meet him that Breton attacks him. He says, "You're an old man without elegance, and you've plagiarized my work on dreams," which is just crazy. And then Dali ended up getting to meet Freud in Vienna, and Freud said to Dali, he said, "Well, with your work, I look for the conscious, but in the classical works, I look for the unconscious," which Dali considered to be like an insult. And Dali had brought some paintings with him to show Freud, which was, I think, the metamorphosis of Narcissus, and Freud just couldn't have been more uninterested. Usually I feel like our authors or philosophers really take it as a compliment when they have artists that are inspired by their work, and he could not have.
Freud was a special snowflake.
Yeah. So, which I think that's why surrealism sometimes I don't know if it's really unfair. Like, surrealism is more associated with misogyny, I think, because of Freud's work. But not, I mean, and some of the imagery is so realistic in its execution that it was so provocative at the time. But I think it's more the association of artists being inspired by Freud that it gets that association versus the art itself sometimes.
It's really interesting because the few surrealist artists that I also know and love are usually female. So it's interesting that it has that association in the art world.
Comment that might be a good transition into talking about the song. So I took a postmodern lit class in grad school, and it was something that was always really interesting to me about it, and kind of why I think doing this topic with Taylor's music is interesting is how even from the Impressionists on, how literary authors were seeing these movements and trying to figure out how to play with their own words. And that's where we see some of this in like Virginia Woolf, where it's a little more like stream of consciousness, but then you also have some that are like really interesting and kind of out there. And I would say this is a very R-rated book, so I take this recommendation with a grain of salt.
Warning.
Angela Carter does some really interesting stuff with literature. The Infernal Desire Machines of Dr. Hoffman is a book that's really stuck with me. It is not PG, and I say it stuck with me. Some of it is for fun, and some of it there are scenes that I still think about, and I'm like, that was a horrifying scene. But it's a very surrealist, like almost this, like it's this constant like dream world, and all of this stuff is like, say, I don't know as much if you do it in art history, but in literature we talk about like, where is this, in humans, are we centering in God? And like postmodern is there's no center, and like I feel like Infernal Desire Machines, there's nothing, like not even no center, there's just like it's all just absolute chaos and dream sequences, essentially, and all of this stuff, and desire fuels the world, and all of these really just interesting images. But it's always really interesting to me how authors who are limited to words try to engage with these more, just the less realistic art, the changes in art, because, you know, for so long it was so realistic, and you move forward and you get more abstract, and it's so much harder to do that with words. So I just think that it's an interesting thing, seeing how those two things always kind of come together, and then that ends us up with Taylor and how she's doing that. We have her music videos, but she does that with words, and then music, which is a whole other component that we haven't discussed, that I don't think any of us are experts in, but we're going to do our best.
We're going to try. Awesome. Well, Abby, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
You really helped us ground our conversation, and we will have you back when we pick the next art history.
So that takes us to our first song. I'm pretty hyped after this discussion. So I picked the song The Archer, and one of the things that I think gets me really excited from our preface with Abby is that she talked about how sometimes surrealism has no meaning, or it's grounded in something that has no meaning. And one of the discussions we were having about The Archer before we started filming or recording this is that nobody really knows what the song means. So pretty excited about going down this rabbit hole. The reason that I picked The Archer is because I think everything from the sound of the music itself to a lot of the imagery that is in the song has this kind of dreamlike quality. And talk about kind of the unconventional pairings. I think some of the images that we come across also make you kind of like, they kind of take you somewhere that might be unexpected, or they come across as like, what? It's track number 5 on Taylor's Lover album, and it's written by the one and only Taylor Allison Swift, as true to my brand on this.
Mine says Taylor and Jack. Mine says Jack, but that could be wrong.
Wait, really?
I mean, I just print them out from easylyrics.com, sponsor us, so it doesn't mean that it's actually accurate.
Hold on, let me double check. I had just Taylor Swift, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, song.
It says songwriter Taylor Swift on Music Match, so maybe Taylor and Jack, maybe just Taylor. Unclear.
Wikipedia says Taylor and Jack, so.
Okay, you have broken your streak.
We will give Taylor and Jack the credit. Great. It's written by Taylor and Jack.
Our boy Jack.
Our boy Jack. Also, now I'm like, are the places where I'm getting my lyrics like miswriting the songwriters? So I should double check them all.
Our listeners will tell us.
Okay, anyways. It came out on Lover. It's definitely one of her later songs. I think a lot of the songs that we're discussing today are
you're the first one today.
Songs.
It's all later today.
So she definitely gets more thoughtful with her lyrics and starts using more intentional, complex kind of lyrics at some point. We could start with the actual music itself, because none of us are really music experts. We always talk about this. And so get that discussion out of the way.
Our next guest will be a music expert.
I think like the way that this song starts, it's got this echoey, dreamlike state, which I think a lot of songs on Lover actually have.
Dreamlike, but like almost nightmare-like, because it's ominous.
I don't know if I hear it as ominous, but I can see how one could hear it as ominous.
I don't know what note it is. I don't know if it's a major or minor, because obviously I haven't played an instrument since 6th grade.
This is why we're getting this part of the conversation out of the way. But
God help me.
I don't know if I would also say ominous. Maybe like a little eerie, but
eerie and anxious. The feeling I get from this song is anxiety, and I already have anxiety, so this is probably why this song doesn't sit well with me, because I'm like, do I need more?
We've talked about ethereal before, and I feel like it does have this kind of, like, if it was a visual, it would be glowy.
I disagree, but okay.
I was telling a friend today that we were going to do this song, and I was like, I have no idea how else to word this, but it makes me feel floaty. That is my very technical analysis.
It's also
where I feel like I'm just kind of like swaying in the clouds.
It makes me feel like I'm on pins and needles.
Okay, well, that might be a conversation for you and your therapist.
Thanks. She's going to be listening to this. So
I'm very interested.
Play the song in your next session and be like, okay, let's go through each moment.
Honestly, this episode is pre-work for therapy. I just like that my therapist has to do pre-work before my therapy appointments now by listening to these podcasts.
I guess one call out for the listeners is that we are going to be deep diving this.
Surrealism.
We'll also be deep diving this particular song. So, Jody, I'm very interested in your interpretation of the song once we get there. But I think like for me at least, I felt like the sound quality also kind of had this kind of surrealist property to it, although we're not able to articulate that really, really well. But just to call out some of the imagery that I think lends itself well to surrealism. We talk about jump from the train, ride off alone. There's some contrasting of like, you visualize someone jumping off, but then you visualize someone riding away alone. It's like, is she jumping off? Is she riding away? Is she riding off on something else? It's just kind of like two jarring images that are in the same line.
Even I never grew up, it's getting so old, right? Like she uses words to create this dichotomy and this tension that is unexpected, and surrealism is about like this contrast and this unexpectedness.
Yeah. I think dark side is interesting because you don't really know what to see in the dark side. I mean, obviously it can mean things like evil or whatever, but I think just visually, you're talking about like blackness and unknown. Cut off my nose in the deep dive we'll discuss like has different meanings, but just like I also get this image of like, again, I think this is a very visual song, so the imagery that creates is like, again, like cutting off your nose, literally, especially because that line is followed up immediately by hate my reflection, and so you're thinking about looking, the act is seeing, and you're taking it more literally, even though it has multiple meanings. She mentions a ghost, I think. Pacing like a ghost.
That
fire.
If you even back up, I awake in the night, I pace like a ghost. You usually awake from a dream. Surrealism is usually very dream-like, but not happy dream-like. When I associate surrealism, again, I think about Dali, or I think it's about the obscure and the unexpected and the asymmetrical. It's these dreams where you're like, why was I walking barefoot across a river? And like, what does that mean?
Yeah,
you have
that's the uncanny.
The uncanny.
Something's just off.
That's what this whole song is to me. Something is just off in this song.
Yeah, it's and the fact that all of these are listed together and they go by pretty quickly as she sings them, it's like combine everything. You're in the dark, you awake in the night, you're pale, like pace like a ghost. There's fire, but the smoke is invisible. Like you put everything together and you definitely get this sense of uncanny of like, what is going on? I'm in a daze. I don't really understand.
The other part of it
going
that read surrealist to me, she talks about, in I think this is the beginning of the bridge, because they see right through me, they see right through me, can you see right through me? This idea, so one of Dali tried to create these like dreamlike techniques, and was very inspired by what you could do in film and moving pictures or with photography to create with lenses and whatnot. And so this whole idea of seeing through somebody is not something you can do in reality, but you can create that effect in photography or in motion pictures or in art.
Also, like,
or with Harry Potter's invisibility cloak.
Sure, or with the invisibility cloak, because it wouldn't be a AP Taylor Swift episode without a good Harry Potter reference.
I mean, now I'm like, well, with an invisibility cloak, it's so possible. But I'm also like, what does I see right through me?
I think that's a deep dive conversation.
Well, yeah, but like, there's the second meaning of like the other meaning of these words, but then the visuals of they see right through me. I'm really imagining like someone just like looking right through somebody, but then I see right through me. It could be like looking in a reflection. It's like, obviously, you know, your own thoughts, but the idea of just like looking down and like being able to see through yourself is like such a trippy kind of idea.
Ooh, trippy is a great word. I feel like everything in this song has a double meaning. There's what you see on the surface. But yes, but to a different degree than what we normally
you're right.
see in a Taylor Swift song.
And I think that's interesting because it's no, sorry. I meant of course, but I meant of course in the way that it is a visual song,
it's a visual
which
song.
Is what makes this weird, because all the imagery is meant to be observed, but at the same time, everything has a double meaning. And so it has a maybe metaphorical or like a deeper meaning. There's another layer to it.
Yeah, we probably should have done this song in metaphor. This would have been a good one.
Yeah, well, I don't even know if I hesitated with metaphor because I think it has a double meaning, but they're not necessarily comparison. But like, but the point is that there's two ways of looking at it. I just think it's interesting because I don't know. I mean, do you guys have a little film reel playing in your head as you hear this song? Because I definitely do.
It gives me very like feel like sometimes I'm just so obviously like the English teacher here, and it's about to happen again because my references are always either random pop culture or it's weird literature. But it gives me very gothic literature feelings of this like wake in the night, pace like a ghost. What it really makes me think of, and I don't know if this is necessarily a compliment, but is Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights. This idea of this like very kind of like mysterious, I've been the archer, I've been the prey. He's kind of contradictions. He's kind of the victim sometimes, but he also like definitely does bad stuff. But he is a very complex like character, and the idea of like pacing like a ghost and all that stuff just kind of like gives me a similar feeling to that kind of like dark, almost gothic feeling like romance genre.
There a scene in Jane Eyre where she awakes and the room is on fire and she thinks it's a ghost.
It's when
yeah,
because Bertha's trying to burn down
the house. I haven't finished that book, but I remember
the two
that
Bronte
scene.
sisters. That Charlotte Bronte wrote Jane Eyre, Emily Bronte wrote Wuthering Heights.
So maybe it's a Bronte song and a Dolly song.
That's really interesting. I do actually, now that you mentioned that, I can totally see some of those gothic themes.
I do think that these lyrics are, I mean, again, yes, her lyrics most often paint a picture, but this one in particular, it is scene after scene after scene after scene, and they're not necessarily connected. And maybe that's the difference here, is usually when she paints a picture, so I go back to right where you left me, she paints a really clear picture of I'm sitting at the table, and now I'm forgetting all the lyrics, but it is one scene, right? And she's all the details and imagery she's giving you paint the one picture you're seeing. Whereas in The Archer, you have, you know, I jump from the train, I ride off alone, I've been the archer, I've been the prey. That's different. I start like I cut off my nose. It's all like it is. There's another.
Well, I liked the
Hieronymus
unconventional
Bach, where like you have this. It's who is not a surrealist, but that picture just has like 1,000 different things going on, and you could look at any one square inch of that work and see a very different scene going on. That's what this song is to me. It's one piece of art that has like a bunch of different scenes and vignettes in it.
And that's why I think when Abby said unconventional pairing, I got really excited because I actually think this song is like the definition of unconventional pairings. It's like, what are these things? Why are they put together? A song about archer and prey like could have been a whole theme that we could have done for our animal studies episode, but like it's a bunch of random things put together.
Or maybe they're not so random, and when we deep dive, we'll find out.
Right. Seemingly random.
Random.
Unexpected.
Definitely unexpected.
The one other one that we didn't quite get to, but I also thought was interesting, it's like the Humpty Dumpty reference in the middle of the song.
That one always gets me.
All the king's horses, all the king's men couldn't put me together again. But that song is about an egg sitting on a wall.
Maybe she's fragile. Eggs are fragile.
Yeah, maybe
like,
she's
this song
fragile.
is fragile. This is a fragile song. It's a track 5, so we know it's deeply emotional.
But I literally get this image of like Taylor Swift in like 20 different pieces, like broken on the floor. Like I think there was a movie that I saw a long time ago where a bunch of nuns like fall down the stairs and like their limbs all like shatter and come off the. I don't know what movie it is. This is something I saw in my childhood.
That's a surrealist film, clearly.
And it's a
this
surrealist
is our
image.
horror episode now.
No, I don't even know if it was a horror film, but it's like that imagery stays in my head. But that was a very surrealist image of like a person has tumbled down the stairs and like all their limbs have fallen apart and they're just like need to be put back together again or like can't be. And that's kind of like what you get out of this. So definitely trying to kind of play around with the imagery and definitely trying to put some unexpected things together in a jumble to convey some greater meaning that we will, I'm sure, uncover in our deep dive. But that's why I feel like this is such a surrealist song.
It's definitely surreal. All right. Well, switching gears and eras, I've got the next song, Closure, from Evermore. This is track 14, written by Taylor Swift and Aaron Dessner. And despite the fact that I know basically nothing about music and music theory, I picked this song because to me the surrealist vibes happen mostly through the time signature and the structure of the music itself. So this is most of it is in 5/8 time signature, and what that means is 5 beats in a bar. Not normally, because music can have many different structures, but traditionally we are used to 4/8, 1 2 3 4, 2 2 3 4. This song is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you have that fifth beat that kind of runs over into the next bar, and it's a very jarring and unexpected sound. So this song immediately stood out to me on Evermore because of how unexpected it sounded. Even the very beginning, before the lyrics actually start, it kind of sounds like pots and pans banging. Like there is no clear rhythm there. But so to prep for this episode, I did two things. One is I took this song to my tap teacher and I was like, "Can you help me figure out the time signature here?" Because he loves a lot of our tap class focuses on jazz music, and jazz music also has varying time signatures, improvisation, a lot of unexpectedness and asymmetry in music. So thank you, Tommy. Shout out for helping me out there. The other is I have this book, Disney and Dali, that I guess I got at the Disney Museum in San Francisco. There was a Dali exhibit, and I've never read this, but then I picked it up because Dali, Surrealism. And the definition that they give of Surrealism is that it expresses the goal of Surrealism is to express the actual functioning of thought, free of rational, aesthetic, or moral control. It channeled the symbolic language of the unconscious mind in the pursuit of a pure form of spontaneous expression. Which is a lot of words, but Abby's definition and the way that she helped describe it around like the uncanny and the unexpected, that is this song to me. The music here is unexpected and it drives the story. And the story of the lyrics is that you unexpectedly get a letter from what I think is an ex. So I read this from a romantic perspective. But basically, whether it's an ex or you're getting a letter from somebody unexpected. Who needed closure. The whole thing is like, I don't need your closure. And I'm going to pause there. I talk a lot.
I definitely oh, go ahead.
You go.
I definitely like the music interpretation of unexpected, because I think when you said you were doing this song, like my head also went to kind of some of the visual imagery. And I do think that it doesn't have a ton of imagery, especially compared to Archer, but I do think like where it does, I do think it is kind of surrealist. Like when you say cut deep right to the bone, I think that kind of comes out of nowhere because
that's a jarring picture to paint as well.
Yeah, like we're talking about a letter and it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And like,
okay, but have you ever gotten an unexpected letter from an ex? Because let me tell you, it is unexpected. It does come out of nowhere.
But does it cut to the bone? Like
it can, depending on what they say, or just even having this person reappear in your life, right? So the whole point, it starts out with "It's been a long time," and seeing the shape of your name still spells out pain. So
but I think like things yet. Like. And now, like, does Taylor just do this with all of her imagery? But it's like tears, beers, my candles, or like the putting the sea, like guilty, reaching out across the sea, put the sea between you and me. You always hear these phrases. She likes to play with words, right? Like you hear these phrases like, oh, it feels like there's an ocean between us. But then she talks about like putting a sea in between you and me. Like that to me like brings this like more film like thing of like, let me just place this sea between the two of us. Like I don't know, like I think some of the imagery is also kind of like just
it can be. I definitely leaned more towards the music and how the music creates that surrealism than the lyrics, but the lyrics certainly play into it.
Yeah, I really saw in that opening lyric that you mentioned, it's been a long time and seeing the shape of your name still spells out pain. The fact that it's not seeing your name, seeing your face, it's the shape of your name, which is very, to me, like when I think of surrealism, when I think of surrealism, I think of like you're in an art gallery and you're like beautiful art. Surrealist art is still beautiful, but it catches you. You're like, wait,
unexpected.
What? And there's something about it, and the way that she words this, like the shape of your name, it's not the letters, it's this immediate recognition that like catches her eye, is like she's seen the shape of this name many times in her life before, and seeing that shape again is almost like it's a separation from it. It's making it more of almost like a piece of art. When you talk about shapes, you're often thinking about like objects or art or putting things together.
It's putting it in a visual medium.
Signature. Yeah, and it's jarring. It causes her to stop and look again. It's that uncanny where it's like something a lot of other ways I've seen uncanny described as like it's something familiar but out of place, and I think that's what's happening here. Seeing the shape of the name is familiar, but it's out of place because it's not a shape she was expecting to see anymore.
It's been a long time.
And she she wants us to be visual here because she's using seeing words. Like she's using seeing looks, the way it went down. Like she's kind of like guiding us to like see something, which is interesting. It's not just like it sounds like this or whatever. Like,
yeah.
And then the letter is something you read. So, I don't know.
And the other thing, the 5/8 time signature in and of itself has no closure. It runs over and it keeps going.
Yeah, I really like that.
So
how does it end at the end? Like, does it feel like you get that at the very end, or it even?
I think it just fades away.
It goes into the pots and pans sounds from the beginning again. You know, hello guys, don't make me do this.
Beatboxing,
that's perfect.
Beatboxing,
that
Jody.
was a setup. So it goes your closure, your closure, your closure, your closure, and then you get the like pots and pans again. So again, like the song is called Closure. You don't get a lot of closure in the music, in the lyrics. Also, closure throughout the whole thing is in quotation marks. So I petition to bring this song back if we ever do an episode on punctuation.
Which, Friends is in quotation marks too, which is interesting.
Right?
Anyways.
So I thought that was interesting. And then so basically like receiving a letter from an ex, again, because I perceive this to be a letter from an ex-lover. It is unexpected. The music is unexpected. Getting that letter is unexpected. And the rhythm itself feels like the unconscious mind. It feels rambling and it just keeps going. And also it changes. It's in 5/8 until right before the 2 bars before, and this is where I would not have known this without Tommy, thank you. The 2 bars before the chorus are in 6/8. So it actually changes in the middle of the whole thing, which is again jarring and makes it very hard to follow. And that in itself is unexpected and uncanny, and just felt like the definition of surrealist music. And I was looking at surrealist music. I didn't find as much as I had wanted, but maybe I didn't look in the right places. So if our listeners have insights here, or if you'd like to be a guest on a music theory episode and school us all, we welcome that.
I think it's interesting that she's like, I don't need your closure. Also, like we were talking about the title and the unexpectedness, I think there. Interesting that like the letter is supposed to be closure and she actually doesn't want it. And then the song also doesn't give you closure, but the song is called Closure. Like there's some interesting play there.
It doesn't say don't want it. It says don't need it.
Yeah, that's true. I don't really know where I'm going with this thought, but I just think
this is where it would be a really good song to deep dive and to do in a different context than surrealism, because I think there's a lot in here in this song, very poetic, that you could go into that doesn't necessarily have to do with surrealism, or maybe it does, and we'll deep dive it. We'll figure that out.
I think it's also the yes, don't need. Like something about like the affirmations and then the negative. Like maybe that's more of the thing that I'm thinking of, but it's like, yes, I got your letter. Like, yes, I'm doing better. I don't need your closure. I don't know. Again, contrast.
To me, it is, again, a personal situation that I have lived through, which is why I feel a lot of kinship with this song. Yeah, this again, it goes back to the unexpectedness of the story that she's trying to tell and how out of place it is, and the music helps create that feeling of being unexpected and out of place. And to me, the yeses is like, if somebody is sending you a letter, it's because they need the closure, not you, right? When you write a letter after a falling out or a breakup, it is probably for you and what you want to say, not that the other person, you're not trying to convince the other person of something. It is more
trying to get the last word. Like,
yeah, you're trying to get the last word or wrap it up for yourself. And so that is not often well received. And if you like it in this song, again, we don't usually do this in a deep dive, but she seems like she is talking directly to the person who sent her a letter. So not only did they send a letter, they're like, did you get my letter? in which case the yes, I got your letter, yes, I'm doing better, I know that it's over, I don't need your closure, makes a lot more sense to me when you have it in that context. And it also makes it that much more jarring, unexpected, and surreal that you're even in this situation where not only did you send me a freaking letter, but you're actually following up to make sure I got your letter. Like, back off.
Yeah.
There's no personal
If it's
experience
over,
here
it's
at
over.
all.
Yeah.
If it's over, it's over.
Yet again, I think my next comment might be a transition comment.
I love those. Go for it. Do it.
Okay. I think what you're saying is so true, and it's something that we'll see. I mean, we already discussed this at the beginning. I will be doing Lavender Haze next. But in closure, surrealism is, yes, a whole art form, but it's also something we just can experience as humans. Those moments where something just feels surreal, where you're like, you feel floaty is still a good word for it, where you feel not grounded because something has happened and you feel like there's a big change. And the idea of getting a letter, whether it's from an ex or from just clearly it wasn't right. Yeah, it wasn't right the way it all went down. Looks like you know that now. Something bad happened. You haven't talked to this person. To even like, it's been, I don't know. So I had a high school sweetheart and we dated for a long time, and it's probably been what, like 12 years. Every now and then, once in a blue moon on like social media, like a picture will come across, and it's still a surreal experience because you're suddenly like, oh yeah, you're like kind of flooded with all of these memories, and it's like that was a whole different life, and like here I am now and I have zero regrets. It's not, you know, it's not always a bad thing, but that surreal feeling of like, oh, like sort of my reality was just like thrown for a loop for a second, and that like physical experience. And we see that in the art, but it's also the idea of surreal is like a personal experience can happen where something around you feels surreal. And I think you get that with this song as well. And my song. So
let's do it. Let's go from to our next era.
All right. So I, spoiling literally nothing, I'm doing Lavender Haze.
From apparently our Surrealism album, Midnights.
Yes.
Also, this is our first repeat song.
I know, I had that thought too, that's fun. We're finally repeating this. So we did this song. Jody, you did this song, Prejudice,
I did this song,
right?
On Pride and Prejudice, which is why my notes on this song are all Darcy and quotes.
Surrealism, Darcy, same thing.
Darcy, same. Which I think I'm really excited to see anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think it'll be super fun. So we said it in the Pride and Prejudice, but I'll say it again. It was track 1 on Midnights, which came out in 2022. Writers were Taylor Swift, Jack Antonoff, Zoe Kravitz, Soundwave, Jahan Sweet, Sam Dew. Okay, yeah, that's all of them.
It's a writing party on this song.
I did seem like a writing party. And yes, so I really firmly believe Midnights is very much a surrealism album. A lot of it is from the music video, so we can talk about this one, but even like Antihero, the way she gets so big, Bejeweled, the way that she and Dita Von Teese are like in these massive martini cups, so you're playing with the like proportions there, the way that she like the way jewels like fall, and Karma is very like against surrealism. Music videos are often kind of surreal, but I feel like it just went up so many levels.
But these absolutely are.
Right. But it's one of those things, like music videos, I feel like you commonly are just a little more artsy than like a standard like short film or something. But this is a whole new level.
For whatever reason, the music video that popped into my head was Back to December, which is like very realistic, or like Hours, right? You know,
there is a change. She started producing and directing her own videos.
Yeah, that's true.
Whereas previously they were made by other people. And I think that maybe that is a little bit of her style. She's clearly a fan of this kind of art.
So maybe Dorothea Tanning really is her inspiration for a lot of this. Maybe she has maybe Taylor has a lot of surrealist art on her walls.
Taylor, give us an interview.
Let us know.
Oh gosh.
Let us
know. I want to stay focused on the song, but I will say that it is interesting because if I think back and trying to think of what's the first music video of hers that I felt was very surreal, it's Cardigan, when she actually started owning her music.
Which apparently has Dali. There's the image of her hanging onto the piano in a storm also references Dali. I probably saw that on Abby's TikTok. I'm for sure did not come up with that on my own.
But so we can stick with Lavender Haze. So Abby already talked about this in the music video a good amount, so I won't get back into it too much. But one thing I thought was really interesting in the music video is the way the like lavender haze physically like will just appear and kind of consume them. That's a very surreal image, obviously. And I think, we know the origin of the phrase comes from like a 1950s era phrase of lavender haze is, being caught in that like heady new love. And so you're being kind of consumed by it. But the thing that makes it so surreal is we're not strangers to like fog or anything, but the lavender color obviously is what's so surreal about it. And it's really interesting to me to see that it's like you get kind of lost in it. There's a point where they're at the party and they're like looking into each other's eyes, and then slowly like the lavender haze is pumped into the party. And at one point when Taylor's dancing, she like has something in her hand that she's like dancing with, and it's pumping out more of that lavender haze. Like she's the source of it. In some ways, it comes out from under their bed at the beginning of it. And I just thought that was interesting. It's very surreal, but it's very tied into like their love is the source of this surreal haze.
It's either surreal or it's 1970s like tripping on things, but which probably either one. But I like to take the academic. Yeah,
like the point is that haze is never actually literally lavender. If you were walking down the street and we suddenly, if we suddenly started seeing lavender,
it's really
haze,
hazy out today, and I wish it was lavender and not gray.
I would be concerned. Like I'd be like, "What is this toxic gas?"
Well, when we had the smoke from the fires in Canada play down, you have this all the time, Monty, in San Francisco. Sadly, it's a red. It's a red haze.
It's called a marine layer. Fun fact. If you ever look at the marine layer logo, the store, they have that.
But I was talking about like when there's fires and then it's red. The sky is just like
that's called
the marine layer.
It's called a marine layer. Really interesting phenomenon that I can go on about, but I looked it up when it actually happened here. But yeah, it's like you have the orange sky. It looks like Blade Runner. Yeah.
Anyway, lavender haze.
Yeah. So the music video is very surreal. We have the floating koi fish, but I kind of want to get into the lyrics themselves because there's some stuff. So obviously she says, I feel the lavender haze creeping up on me. Surreal. So she literally says the word surreal. Pretty straightforward there. What I think is interesting about this imagery is I feel the lavender haze creeping up on me. She is the source of it in the music video. It's clearly like the source of their love, yet she is not in control of it, which I think, again, adds to that surrealism of like there's almost this external surreal force that's kind of happening to her. And she's not necessarily like intentionally creating it, which I think adds to the surrealism of it of like, and we could have done this, I think, episode also, all of these would have been great for metaphor, but like lavender haze is clearly a metaphor for like falling in love because it was a phrase that is not new, and so we know that. But I think the way that she does the surrealism is really interesting because it is not just like unexpected, jarring, different, but it's also capturing that feeling of like when you're starting to fall in love of like, oh, it's happening. Oh, okay. Like it's not always the most active decision when you're starting to kind of get into that moment. So I thought that was really interesting as well.
I think one thing that was also interesting in this song was that it's just the lavender haze, which is the whole song. So it's like clearly the whole song has a surrealism. She mentioned surreal in it. The feeling, I think, is surreal that she's trying to point out, but it's unlike some of the other songs, you don't actually have a ton of like visual imagery here outside of the lavender haze. The video,
it's more about what she feels.
Yeah, like the video. I would even say the music definitely has this like floaty kind of surreal feel to it. Again, I think it has like the echoes, kind of similar to some of the musical style of the Archer. But like the lyrics by themselves, outside of the haze itself,
outside of that,
there's not a ton of imagery here, which is interesting because she tends to have such visually
visual language.
Songs. Yeah.
I do think it's really interesting that it starts with Meet Me at Midnight. Obviously, the title of the album is Midnights. However, we talked a lot about surrealism is very dreamlike, subconscious imagery.
Yeah,
so to immediately ground the song in the middle of the night is really interesting.
Well, the whole album was meant to be things that kept her up in the middle of the night. And so you have that. Maybe that is why it is such a surrealist album, because it is all from that dreamlike state.
Well, and midnight is also known as the witching hour, which is like when unexpected things happen, or like when you expect the or like when you encounter bizarre kind of things because of the dreamlike. But I would say like even if you're like meeting someone at midnight, it's like that's a weird time to.
It's a weird.
Yeah, it's definitely grounding it in a non-standard, very like surrealist, dreamlike something. I also think the line, I find it dizzying, they're bringing up my history, was really interesting because we talked about how surrealism kind of like throws you off your game a little bit. It's jarring. And so we have, again, this image of being dizzying, but the dizzying is the dizzying about being in love, or is it finding it dizzying that her history is being brought up and this other person's not listening?
I think it's a reference to the line above it. The couple lines above it is, all they keep asking me is when I'm going to be your wife. The only kind of girl they see is a one night or a wife. I find it dizzying. That to me, I thought, is what she was referring to, just like the constant chatter. But I think what the idea of something being dizzying is a choice. Saying the word dizzying is a choice that lends to this surrealist, middle of the night, jarring, like off kilter, I'm going to say the word, vibes of the song.
Yeah, I felt like what I was sort of starting to think about there is with this idea of, like I said before, enclosure of surreal as something being a surreal experience, that the fact that what everyone is saying is creating a dizzying effect is that there's like no non-surreal experience for the speaker of this song.
Right.
Either
That's
outside
true.
of this relationship, it's surreal how much everyone is talking about her, talking about the relationship, and inside the relationship, it is surreal just how much they're in love and how they're feeling about each other. That there is no grounding experience in this song that I could find, at least.
There's nothing very grounding about falling in love. It is not a grounding experience. So that's
true.
Makes sense.
Falling experience.
It's falling. Aka, hi.
It's a spiral. It's a love spiral, which is really
Yeah.
interesting. This is going to be a slightly sad thing to say, but I was trying to think of like literary references of like this. And my first thought was very much Romeo and Juliet, where they get caught up in each other and they're almost like just ignorant of what's happening outside of them. Like that's a very well-known example. And then it's sad because it's a tragedy, but the line is a one night. The only kind of girl they see is a one night or a wife. And Juliet was both. They had one night and they were married and that's all they ever had together. And I was like, that's actually really sad to think about.
When I think surrealism, I think Alice in Wonderland. I think of, falling down the rabbit hole. That's where my head goes.
Yeah, and I did Anti-Hero for our Alice in Wonderland episode, so it's kind of a similar concept.
Midnights. Yeah.
I don't remember
Midnights
how
is a
we
very
picked the
surreal.
topic of surrealism, but I really like it. It's a really fun.
I think I also think it's like my favorite kind of art now that I think about it.
Who you mentioned? Female artists. Who are some of those artists that you love?
I am a big fan of Remedios Varo, who is a technically I think Spanish artist, but she lived in Mexico City for quite a while in the 1900s. And I did not know this, but Mexico City was really a big hub for surrealism. Actually, there were quite a few artists that moved there. I mean, we talk about Dali. I think Dali was in Mexico City for some time. Potentially.
It was like a response, like anti-fascist, because again, it was like the degenerate art. Yeah, so there was that,
and there was like a thriving like equivalent of the parlors where people would go to exchange ideas. There was also more freedom for communist people,
like Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera.
Right. So that entire there was a bunch of artists there, which I think was cool.
What was the timing of surrealism in the art movement?
After World War I.
1917. It started 1917, and then it was 20s. Most active in that post-war period, and then afterwards, because the Nazis considered most surrealist art degenerate art.
Yeah, so
that's what I thought. Because go ahead, Monty.
No, I was going to say like Remedios Varo, I think, was creating art during the 20s and 30s. In Mexico City.
According to my Dali and Disney book, the later years are considered 1948 to 1968.
Okay, because I was going to say those earlier years and the stuff you were saying also reminds me a lot of what was going on in literature with the Harlem Renaissance, of this just ability for... Well, it was just this time where people who previously were barred from sharing things and creating art could suddenly do it. And then unsurprisingly, we got this huge burst of new types of literature, new types of art, and all of this stuff. And it was just kind of like we'd been going there for a while, which is nice. But it's just like if you look at like literary history, the Victorian era was like a really long time, and like there's definitely differences and stuff, but it's you hit this point in history where it's suddenly some of these walls start falling down and we're getting more diversity in art. And guess what happened? We got more diversity in art. We got new stuff. We got new thoughts, and it's really cool to see how those timelines
It's
add up.
also the mental space. I mean, World War I until World War II was the Great War. It was the biggest war, the bloodiest war that anyone globally had ever seen. And so you do have the youth that is immediately following that, just kind of like, screw it, we're gonna do whatever we want. Like, it was like a very like throw caution to the wind. We made it, we survived,
1920s,
we're alive.
yeah, there's a reason.
Yeah, and so I do think that there's this sense of like, it's time to just feel alive. It's time to throw all expectations out the door. It's time to just do whatever the heck you want and break all the rules because we are still alive and we're here.
And I'm gonna make what might be a stretch, but might not, I don't know, not comparing the pandemic one-to-one to the Great War, but the pandemic also was this like jarring force historically in everybody's lives. There was a lot of death and uncertainty. We're bringing it back to Taylor Swift. What came out of that? Evermore and Folklore, two very different albums for her from a musical style perspective. And then what was right after that? Midnight's, her surrealist album. So if you're mirroring the two time periods, also almost exactly 100 years apart. So
well, I think people have
works.
been talking about us, like, I mean, we're going through a recession period, but like people were talking about like the next renaissance, or we're entering some sort of renaissance. I mean, AI is changing.
The roaring 20s
technology
again.
Exactly. But yeah, it's like the roaring 20s again, and there's similar feelings coming out of this pandemic, and you have this sense of like, the technology is different. What does that mean for how art will evolve? What does that mean for how music will evolve? What does that mean for the creative people now that you have this AI technology? Like, how will everything shift and change? So I do think there are some valid parallels there.
Well, we went on a whole journey on this one. I loved it. Well, tune in next time when we deep dive The Archer.